Croeso friends, welcome back to this very special extra episode of Opus Elenae where we deliver on promises. In my last video about making St Birgitta caps, I said that I would make an in-depth tutorial on how to do the multi-columned interlaced herringbone stitch. And here we are. I have my cuppa, just August Uncommon Passage, chocolate and hazelnut tea, and today I just want to get right into it. For my supplies, I'm going to need some fabric, a needle, a bunch of colored embroidery thread, an embroidery hoop, a mini quilting ruler, and a bunch of friction markers. I'll use my tiny quilting ruler to mark off the width lines, and then I can start marking where each stitch goes. I'm marking different colored dots down each side, 3/8 of an inch apart. Why different colored dots? As I mentioned in the St Birgitta Cap video, each column of knotwork is built on a pair of mirrored herringbone stitches. This example is going to have 2 columns, so I will need 2 pairs or 4 individual herringbone stitches. Each one will have a designated color, which makes it very easy to keep track of when you're working in one color of thread. In this instance, it's not such a big deal because every thread will be the same color as its marks for science. Because we're working with 4 different colors here, each color is marked off 12/8 or 1.5 inches apart and is offset on either side by 1/4 of an and is offset on the other side by 3/4 of an inch, so each color zigzags evenly down the sides. This series of herringbone stitches is where we set up the foundation for the knotwork that happens later, so it's important to get this step right. I'm starting the blue herringbone thread here, and as I stitch, you can see that on the top line, the working end of the thread goes over the stitch already taken so that the newer stitch lays on top. On the bottom line, however, the working thread goes underneath the stitch already taken so that the newer stitch lays underneath. This will hold true for every set of herringbone stitches we take going forward. Top line stitches lay on the top, bottom line stitches lay underneath. Now for the second color, again making sure that the stitches are crossing at the lines in the proper way. We start to see the beginning of the weaving here, and the key to making sure that the crossings stay correct is to follow the thread in an over-under pattern from the outside in. For example, since the first thread crossing from the top has the working thread on top, the next thread intersection must go underneath the blue thread. Since the bottommost thread crossing has the working thread on the bottom, the next intersection up must go over the blue thread. Don't worry about the spaces in the middle, they will get filled in as the next threads get laid. Third color, green this time. We're going to pretend there's another thread for this working end to cross over, and then from there the thread goes in an under-over pattern until the next stitch at the bottom. That one starts the first crossing underneath and then over and under again until the next stitch at the top. You can check your pattern against the other stitches as well, making sure the weave is consistent on the other threads. Last thread and the herringbone weave will be complete. I'm simulating the thread coming from a stitch that's outside the hoop so I can set up the weave through the pink and blue threads. I know what the weave should be because I can see that the pink thread crosses over the green, so the purple needs to also cross over so the pink is underneath. Then under the blue and the working thread crosses underneath at the bottom stitch. And then it's pretty intuitive from there. Over, under, over, and then the top stitch. Keeping the proper tension is a concern as you're doing this whole process. You want the thread to be taut, not pulling tightly against the fabric or floating too loose. Now we're ready to get started with the looping stitches. The first line of loop stitches is going to be worked over the top two sets of thread crossings. Pass the needle over the top thread and under the bottom thread of the first crossing and pull the working thread taut but not tight. Next, work a loop around the top thread crossing by passing the needle in an over-under pattern around each leg of the X. The goal here is to distort the herringbone weave as little as possible. You might recognize that there's a place where the working thread passes over two threads here. This is normal and the pattern will be completed during the second row of loop stitches. We're just going to repeat those two steps until we get to the end of the row. When I switch from working the herringbone stitches to the looping stitches, I also like to switch from a sharp needle to a blunt one. It's less likely to catch on threads as I'm working around them. Once you get comfortable with the structure of the loop stitch, you can start combining stitches. This speeds up the process a bit. The second line of loop stitches is worked over the second and third set of thread crossings, mirroring the first line that we just did. And yes, the second set of crossings has already been worked. This is going to create the knotwork columns. We're going to come up over the first thread crossing in an over-under pattern. Here you can see another place where the thread goes under-under, but both will be fixed in just a second. Make the thread loop around the next crossing as we did before, under the legs of the lower thread and over the legs of the upper. This is where we're going to fix both of those thread skipping issues. As the working thread moves out of the loop section and into the next curve section, it forms the last strand of the knotwork. As I work this row, I'm making sure to adjust the tension as necessary, keeping the set of mirroring loops aligned. And then we start all over again. When we finish this row of looped stitches, we'll have completed one full column of knotwork. If you wanted just this one column, work it over one pair of herringbone stitches and you'd be finished here. For the third row of loops, we're not going to continue directly to the next set of crossed stitches, but skip down to the very bottom rows. This is a personal preference. I find it easier to skip a row, but if you find that working strictly top to bottom is better for you, go for it. This row is a direct mirror of the first row of looping stitches we did over the bottom two sets of crossing threads. If it's easier to parse, you can turn the work over so that it's exactly the same stitch, but for this tutorial, I wanted to keep everything oriented the same throughout. Final row of loops. You may notice that both sets of thread crossings that this row is worked on already have stitches on them. The curved portion will be worked as a mirror of the second half of the other column, and the loops will be worked on the middle set of thread crossings. The loop of this thread sits behind the light green loop that's already been worked on that middle set of thread crossings. It's very visible now in such a different thread color. I did that on purpose, but when stitched in the same color, it blends right in together. Thank you to all of my current and continuing Ko-fi members. Your support and the support of all of my members and croissants makes it easier to do what I do and to provide quality content for everyone. Thank you all so much. Stick around after this brief commercial break to see the 3-column version of this stitch. For the 3-column version, I've marked out 3 sets of mirrored herringbone stitches instead of 2, and again, each herringbone stitch will be sewn in the corresponding color to the markings. The process is exactly the same as in the 2-column version, except for 2 extra threads. Next, I've worked a column of knotwork along the top edge of the herringbone weave, and another column along the bottom edge. Now we're going to work one more column of knotwork down the middle, and this time the loop stitches will be worked behind the existing loops of the columns I've already stitched. The first step of this process is the same as the very first step of the 2-column version, only instead of the loops being worked on a clear set of thread crossings, they're worked behind the bottom loops of that top column. The beginning footage of this step got garbled, so we're starting in media res. This final step is just like the second step of the 2-column version, but again, the loops are worked behind the existing loops of the lower knotwork column. You can see how each side of the individual columns ends up as a mirror of the other, and how each column is essentially the same, built on an extra set of thread crossings.
I hope this tutorial was helpful to everyone trying to figure out how to work these stitches. If you're more of a written tutorial person, keep an eye out on my Ko-fi for a text and picture version by the end of the month. October is event heavy this year, so I'm a little pressed for time. I was also asked for some tips on how to wear a St Birgitta cap, and I do have a couple of things that might make it a bit easier for you. 1. If you have overly smooth hair, there are several ways to minimize any slipping you might be experiencing. You can use dry shampoo in order to give your hair a bit more texture to give the cap something to grip onto. You can sew a velvet ribbon to the inside of your cap binding to give the cap some more grippiness, or you can wear a wig headband underneath your cap for the ultimate grip. This is usually what I do if my hair is too slippery. 2. To get the proper length of band, don't measure once and immediately join the ends of the loop. Put the cap on and wear it for a while. You may find that the linen stretches a little bit when it warms up and you need it shorter. Or you may find that the end of the loop sitting at the back of your head doesn't give enough stability and grip and you need it longer in order to loop it at the nape of your neck instead. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, click the bell for notifications if that's your jam, and consider sharing this or any of my videos to social media. If you're interested in finding me on said social media, I am at Opus Elenae everywhere, and those links as well as the link to my Ko-fi will all be in the description box below. Until next time, be kind, do the work, continue supporting marginalized people, and keep creating. Well.